So what we're going to talk about today, Jose, is the pricing portion listing presentation. What I'm aware of is that for many agents, this is a big kind of stumbling block for them. Oftentimes they back themselves into a corner by saying things like, I believe, I think, I feel really confident we can get. And then when it doesn't sell, they're like, but you told me, Jose, right? And it becomes a challenge. So perhaps start with, like, in the past, how did you used to present price? Because I presented that way too, because we learned it, in a similar way. And then how did we augment it and what are we doing today? And then we could do some role playing and just kind of get into it.
So I think where I would get stuck is I would go over the market analysis, and then I would ask them, based on what we see, where is the marketplace showing us that we would need to be at that would be somewhat reflective of fair market value. But I think where I would get stuck is if they ask me, like, well, what do you think, Jose? And that was a trap. As soon as they asked me, like, well, what do you think, Jose? As soon as I open my mouth and say a price that they don't want, I would watch the body language change completely. Like, I would watch them go from, like, talking to me to arms crossed all of a sudden to basically like, hey, this guy doesn't understand our home. This guy doesn't believe in our home. And then it almost became like a debate at that point. And I remember, Aaron, losing listings over $5,000 because they wanted a price of $5,000 higher. Somebody else would list it, would do a small price reduction of $5,000 or $10,000 and sell it. And I'd be like, I was right. Like, but I didn't get paid. So it didn't matter if I was right or not.
Yeah. It's like you would walk out of there like, well, I showed them, and like somebody else listed it and sold it. So what Jose's saying there is absolutely accurate. When they ask you like, well, what do you think? You just verbally vomiting and saying a number without kind of setting that up in some way is a trap, because now it's going to become a debate between you and them. So excuse me. Yo, I'm fighting through a cold like you had, bro. But that's what we do here, bro. I just show up anyway. You know what I'm saying? Still giving you guys the juice. So you want to say something like, well, I appreciate you asking. And, when we look very closely here at this data, we can see that the last, closed transactions, there was like 550, another one at 540. We see that the neighbors are asking like 560, 570. I guess I'm curious. Tell me, in your opinion, what do you think the buying public is telling your neighbors at 560, 570 about their price? And then be quiet. And they'll be like, well, I guess it's a little too high. Yeah, I agree with you. The marketplace is telling them that it's a little bit too high. Notice, I didn't say, hey, you know what? Those other ones are too high. And then it's an argument, because then they're going to say, well, my home's nicer. I redid the toilets and the doorknobs, and I have ducks in the backyard. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you're going to hear. So instead, you get them to tell you, and then you're like, yeah. And being that, the last closed sales were at like, 550 and 540. I mean, honestly, if you were a buyer, not a seller, and you were going to buy this home all over again, having seen that information in terms of those sitting on the market for 65 days and not selling at 560, 570, and then seeing the ones that had sold and closed in the last 30 to 60 days at 550 and 540, I mean, as a buyer, where do you think you would feel comfortable making an offer that you believe would be reflective of fair market value? And then be quiet, because the goal is you want them to tell you, because they're never going to argue with their own information. They will argue with yours, though, just like Jose just said.
And here's what I wanted to say. Like, so they'll ask you how much you think my home is worth over the phone. We'll do that in a separate video for you guys. This is specifically for the listing presentation. So where I wanted to kind of start up is, how do we set up the listing presentation, the pricing portion of it? So in my opinion, there's an introduction in the listing presentation. In some cases, you can go over a little bit of marketing, you can revisit motivation, and you can go over the CMA portion of the presentation. There's like little breakdowns of it. So what we wanted to go is over the portion of the CMA portion of the presentation. So like, let's say, Aaron, you get to the portion where you're going to go over the CMA. How do you set it up? And then how do you present comps as well too? And then I can give an opinion as well too. Now here, I'll give you guys a gold nugget before Aaron takes over on that portion. Sometimes
what you mean, bro? What are you trying to say, bro? I just trying to take over shit all the time? How dare you?
Oh man. Here we go again. I'm kidding. So what I was going to say is, sometimes when you're going over the comps and when you're setting it up, they'll say something like, well, Jose, why don't you just, so Jose, what's the bottom line? Like, what do you think my home is actually worth? or Jose, just tell me a number, basically. Now, what I typically say, there's one of two ways you can handle it. One, it's a driver and you just basically get faster to the point. Or the other way of handling it is, look, if I tell you a number, the very next question that you're going to ask me is, how did you arrive at that number? So versus me just telling you a number, let me show you the comps. And as soon as we get done with the comps, I promise you it's going to be very clear as to what the actual market value for your property actually is. Boom. And it allows me to continue with the process. But I remember when people would ask me that, I would get nervous and just blur out a number. And then after that, the presentation was over. So let's set up the presentation, Aaron. Let's go over the CMA portion and how you would set it up and how you would present the actual comps.
Okay, good. So let's say we get to the pricing portion of the presentation, and I would say something like, okay, so the good news is we really only have to focus on a couple things during our time together. The first is your motivation to sell this property, which is clear. You definitely want to do it. The second issue is the price. Now, I prepared for you, myself, team, and staff, what we call a competitive market analysis. And the purpose of that analysis, Jose, is really to determine not a pinpoint to the penny in terms of price, but instead a very tight, realistic range as to what would be reasonable. And it's comprised of two types of research. The first type is what is active on the market right now and not selling, which is actually very helpful to us, Jose, because your neighbors, they've done us a huge favor. Do you know what it is?
No, I don't. What is it?
Well, they've tested the market for us at certain prices and it's not working. That's very helpful to us, right? So we can learn from that information, because I know you were kind enough to share with me that time is somewhat of the essence. We really want to be under contract in the next 90 days, which would mean we would need a fully executed agreement that closes within the next 30 to 45, because it takes 30 to 45 days to close. Does that make sense to you?
It does, yeah.
All right. The second piece of data we're going to look at is what has actually sold and closed most recently. And the reason why that's super helpful is it gives us a clear picture as to what buyers and sellers have been agreeing to for homes that are similar to yours, right? And in looking at those two pieces of information, what we're going to see, Jose, again, come to the surface is not like, to the penny, but instead a range, plus or minus, 10, 15,000 bucks as to what's reasonable. And then from there, it's going to come down to strategy, because how we choose to position a property price-wise is a strategy and attempt to get the most. And we'll go over those strategies because I want you to feel comfortable with the strategy we end up choosing. Fair enough?
Got it. Okay. Well,
Right.
Aaron, what do you think? Just tell me a number,
Yeah. And listen, I appreciate you asking. And what my professional experience is when we review this information, it'll become very clear as to where the marketplace is showing us we need to position it at. And my experience is that when you self-discover that, it allows for us to come up with that number in a much easier way. Because if I just tell you, it becomes debatable. At the same time, if you, having looked at this information, make a decision like, yeah, if I was a buyer and I was going to buy this place all over again, that's something entirely different. Does that make sense to you?
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, my intention here, Jose, is not to be right. And it's not to prove myself like smart. My intention instead is just to equip you with all the information you need. So you and Mariela, you guys can make a decision about how to position a property price-wise that will allow you to get what you want in the time you want. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then we would go into the pricing kind of conversation where we're going to take a look at the actives. We'll take a look at the sold and closed properties. And first actives, I'm going to show them on my iPad. And the reason I'm going to do that is, pieces of paper are one-dimensional. They can't actually like zoom in, and we're so accustomed to that. Like if you're in the crowd or if you're watching this right now, right? How many times have you ever, right? Never have I ever. Have you ever seen a picture and actually went like this? But it was like a physical picture. I've done that. And the reason why is we've been trained to do that. That is our expectation. Right. So presenting in a way where people can, zoom in and stuff, it goes from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional, and they can really see if properties are as nice or not as nice.
How many properties are you bringing to the presentation, Aaron? And it sounds like obviously you're including pictures, because I've seen agents bring like a one-line CMA of like 20 properties. And I look at that one-line CMA of 20 properties, and the way that they say is they look at the average. They're like, oh, the average of all the properties is 550. Therefore, your property should sell at 550, which in my opinion, I think that's an incorrect way of doing it, just because in that average, there could be fixtures, there could be properties that are fully remodeled, and properties that are fixtures sell for less, properties that are fully remodeled sell for more. And then there's different variances in that as well, too.
Yeah, I agree. And somebody just asked in the comments, like, do you have a favorite place to research features and value add? Like, what happens is when you get you go on a lot of appointments, I have like a good guesstimate, and I know that that's squishy and people don't like it. And I'm sure that's true in your marketplace. So I know properties, let's say in the $500,000 to $700,000 range, if they have a redone kitchen, it's worth approximately a certain amount, right? Like give or take a little bit. I know that in lower price point, let's say 200 to 500, a redone kitchen is worth a certain amount. Same with baths and same with flooring, right? So, and a pool, what appraisals will give for a pool in a geographic area. And I think the issue with pricing is people get caught up in like the weeds. They want to be like very, very specific. And I'm interested in a range. Like I just want to be in striking distance, right? I don't want to be like, wow, I think it's $27.33 and 24 shekels like square foot. You know what I mean?
All that becomes debatable.
Yeah. And they get caught up in it. They're going to argue with you.
Not only that, but it's like, are you really going to make adjustments for everything? Like, are you going to make adjustments for a heater? Are you going to make adjustments for solar? So I took a class from an appraiser. I paid an appraiser. I don't know if you know this, Aaron, but I paid an appraiser one time when I was trying to break into the Santa Barbara market, and I paid him to give me a tour, and I watched him do comps. And what I learned from him, because I asked him, I said, how much of an adjustment would you give to a pool? And he said, instead of trying to make or in order to find the adjustment, it's going to vary based on neighborhood. Try to find properties without pools and what they sold for, and try to find properties with pools. And that's the adjustment right there, basically. So what I try to do as I'm preparing comps is if I know that their kitchen, which you would find out in the prequel, is fully remodeled or the house is fully decked out, I'm going to try to bring comps that are fully decked out. If I know that they have a pool, I'm going to try to bring comps that have a pool. If I know that they have,
for people that are listening, I'm sorry to interrupt you. For people that are listening, what that'll do is it'll decrease the probability they're going to argue with you.
100%. If they have a bigger lot, I'm going to try to bring homes with the same size lots or even bigger. Because now it's like, well, my home has a 20,000 square foot lot. The property you brought only has an 8,000 square foot lot. If you bring a home with a 20,000 square foot lot, now it doesn't become debatable. It's like, oh, well, that one has a 20,000 square foot lot. That one,
and or even lots that are a little bit bigger. Because then they can't really say too much about it. You're like, yo, this one has a lot that's actually 50,000 square feet. It's over an acre. Now, that's a little bit bigger than yours, isn't it? And they're like, well, yeah. You know what I mean?
It becomes less debatable. So instead of trying to make adjustments, try to bring the select. And we can do a whole video on how to select the right comps. But I actually think that the CMA portion of the presentation has a lot to do with the comps that you bring, basically. I usually bring 2 to maybe 4, tops 5 properties basically with me. I usually find that the less comps that there is, and if you can paint a picture with less comps, that's actually a lot better basically. Usually the way that I select the comps is I try to find one that we're definitely better than, I try to find one that's similar, and then I try to find one that's better than ours, and then that gives us the range basically right there. Okay, you're definitely better than this one. This one's like kind of similar. And this one's better than yours. So as you can see, it kind of gives a range basically.
Yeah. And somebody asked on the Instagram live that I'm doing, Ponzi, he's a elite builder in your neck of the woods. And he was like, hey, what if there aren't those comps? Because in today's Ventura market, we've been running into that dilemma. And what I would propose is, I mean, you list 100 properties like a year. So are you running into that or no? If there's no comps?
What I would say is that most people don't get creative enough when it comes to comp selection, meaning like they're used to like, okay, like only in this geographical area. So like, let's say that I do comps in a gated community, and in that gated community, there's only one sale. I'll go out to other gated communities that I know are similar to that gated community to find the comps, even if they're over a mile radius, to see what they sold for. If like I know that like for multifamily, like if I know that there's no comps in that specific city, I'll try to go out to other cities that are similar. So I'll go out like deep in time. So like I'll go out maybe like 1,000 days, which is like 3 years sometimes, and just try to be like, okay, like what actually sold 3 years ago? What's the highest? And then I'll even ask myself questions like, okay, if that one sold in 2019 at 800,000, is the market better now than in 2019, or is it now? Like, how much approximately has it appreciated? So I'll include that, and then I'll go out further as well too. Like if they're on an oversized lot, I may go out to even different cities if I have to. So I think that whenever people say that there's not enough comps, I don't think that they're getting creative enough in terms of going out to look for comps. And we can do an entire video on comp selection, just how to get like more creative with similar style properties. Because the more unique of the property it is, the more creative you have to get as it relates to finding similar comps. The other thing is, like I faced this on unique properties like a commercial building, where on the MLS, some of the there's not a lot of comps. But if you go on the tax records, you click on the tax records around it, and you'll see that stuff is sold privately. So with more unique properties, I'll even click on the tax records to see if something may be sold privately that isn't listed on the MLS. Because I ran into situations where they're like, oh yeah, like you didn't include this one, but my neighbor across the street sold at $1 million. And I'm like, how did I miss that? And the reason that is that it was a private type of sale. And for certain properties like multifamily, commercial properties that are acreage, properties with bigger lots, in some cases, those sell privately. So I think that's an entire course on how to do comps the right way.
I agree. Yeah. And you don't want to be in that situation where they're like, oh yeah, my neighbor sold over there, and you don't have that one. You're like, huh? It makes it look like you don't know what you're doing. So
Yeah,
Fonzie said
100%.
like, yeah, so expanding the radius and the time frame after the sale is a good idea. Yes, it is, Fonzie. That's what I would do. So okay, so we've set this up. We set it up in a way where there's very specific language. If you noticed, I'm like, yeah, what we'll end up with is not a pinpoint to the penny. Most agents make the mistake of being like, it is worth this. And that backs them into a corner. It becomes an argument, like that sort of thing. Versus like, hey, it's going to be a realistic range as to what's reasonable. And then from there, it'll come down to strategy. So I'm inserting this idea of strategy in an attempt to get the most. And we'll go over those strategies because I want you to feel comfortable with the one we end up choosing. So what most agents do is they don't talk about the strategies of starting high and coming down or just positioning it competitively. They're more like, it's worth this. And that's a mistake. That is completely a mistake. You will lose more, like a lot of listings doing that.
Got it. So let's say that, and this is a pro tip as well too. Like, let's say I go over the first comp. So the first property we're going to take a look at is this property on 123 Banana Street. Are you familiar with this property? Oh yeah, that's the Smith's home. Okay, so this one is, and you can ask them how many bedrooms, how many baths. I'll usually just say this one's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,800 square feet. Yours is 1,800 square feet. I'll say something along like, okay, this one's 7,000 square feet. Yours is 7,000 square feet. But I actually forgot this part. So before we go into the comps, I actually revisit their property tax records. So, and this is kind of the way that I present comps. This is just to give the viewers a little bit of a different idea. So I'll say something along the lines like, great, so what I've done, Aaron, in preparation for our meeting is I prepared what I call a comparative market analysis. The comparative market analysis is just a fancy word for what is active right now in the marketplace and then what is sold and closed most recently. Now, it's important to understand when looking at this market analysis that it's not going to give us an exact dollar amount. Instead, it's going to give us a range of where the properties are selling at. Now, the reason it's not going to give us an exact dollar value is that every property is going to vary based on condition. Every property is going to be vary based on size. Every property is going to be vary based on lot size, and it's going to vary on when it's sold. Therefore, it's not going to give us an exact dollar amount. Now, when it gives us the range, it comes down to strategy. And there's 2 strategies that you can utilize. One, we can decide to start a little bit higher to leave a little bit of room to negotiate. Or 2, we can decide to price it a little bit higher. Sometimes that drives a little bit more traffic. And sometimes you could end up with a bidding war. Now, whatever you decide, it's completely up to you. You're the boss and you're the final decision maker. Now, before we get into the comps, I just want to confirm a couple details about your property. And I confirm the tax records. And the reason you confirm the tax records is you will be in situations where if you don't do this, they'll be like, oh, my house is not 1,800 square feet. My house is 2,500 square feet. And you get blindsided. Mm-hmm. So I'll say, this is what the tax records show, and I just want to confirm that this is correct. Tax records show your home is 1,800 square feet. Does that look right? I thought it was 2,100. Okay. So maybe I can put 1,800 to 2,100. Shows that it's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath. It shows that it's 7,000 square foot lot, and it shows that this is this. Does this look correct? Yes, it does. Okay, great. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is just so that when we're taking a look at other properties, we know how your property compares to other properties. And now the only adjustments that we have to make are condition and time of sale.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
And what came up for me too is like oftentimes people don't realize that like garage square footage, that appraisers don't count it. So
That's
they're
not
like, yeah, it's
included.
4,200. And you're like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm looking here at the tax rolls, and the tax rolls in Florida anyway, they give you the breakdown of like the main house versus the garage. And I'm like, yeah, so you're right in the sense that the garage, if you include that, it's 2,100. I don't know if you know this, appraisers don't count on like not heated and cooled square footage in like their price per square foot or square footage like assessments. Did you know that? And they're like, well, no, I didn't know that. But if you don't have that with you, you'll be blindsided by it.
You'll be blindsided because they'll have a different expectation, and then it leads to a debate. So it's important to understand that. Now, when I'm going over the comps, and this is what I was going, is you can say, well, this property, are you familiar with this home? 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And then I'll show them the pictures. And when I'm showing them the pictures, I'll zoom in on some of them. And then I'll ask them, I'm like, just out of curiosity, like, what is your opinion on this property? Is this property better than yours? Are you better than this one? Or is it similar? Meaning you have some things that they don't have, and they have some things that you don't have. And then it maybe comes down to preference at that point. And what I'm getting there is I'm getting their opinion as to like, okay, what they thought about that property, you know? Like, and that'll kind of tell you where they want to really be at in price. And this is what you'll see. Some people are delusional when it gets to this stage of the game.
Oh, yeah.
When you ask them for their opinion, you will see how delusional and how emotionally attached people are connected to the property. So you may show them a property that's clearly way better than theirs, and then say, well, I like mine better.
Yeah. Or I like my fucking, like a tile better. Or what, I'm sure you've heard this where they're like, hey, I don't care what the comps say. So it's just complete delusion. And to Jose's point, with prequal, you'd probably hear some of that like ahead of time, so you'd probably know. But if you get there and they're like, yeah, but I think mine's nicer, you can say something like, well, I appreciate that. And I don't know about you, but my experience is that whatever's mine is better than anybody else's. I mean, that's, the comedian George Carlin said, do you ever notice that like my stuff is stuff and your stuff is junk? And they're usually like, haha. And I'm like, yeah, like I totally get that. At the same time, tell me this, if you look at this through the eyes of the buyer, because I know the buyer's hat's different than the seller's hat, and you saw this property that for all intents and purposes, other than cosmetics, has the same kind of, features and benefits, and they're asking $550. I mean, honestly, if another one had different colors, would you spend $50,000 more for it? And then, right, to get them to tell you, well, probably not. You know what I mean?
And in some cases, you can ignore comments like that, but just get to the point where you're like, hey, based on what we see, where is the marketplace showing us that we would need to be at? And just wait till they say a number, and then even address it there. So let's say you go over the 3 comps. Obviously, you have the range. What I usually like to do is I like to give them a summary. I'll say, okay, so just a quick summary of our conversation, Aaron. The first property, and I'll write it down on a piece of paper. I'll say, the first property we just looked at was the property on 123 Banana Street. This is the property that is X square footage at X lot size. This is the one that you said yours was better than. Okay? The next property that we took a look at, and I'll say something like, that one sold at $550 and it sold on X time. So because it sold at X time, I think the market is better, so we'll likely get better than that. I'm kind of painting a picture for them. Then I'll say something like, okay, we have the other property. This is the one that you said was very similar and sold at $575, and it sold just a month ago. And this is the property that you said that this one is better than yours, and it sold at $600. So based on what we see, and I have like little arrows, I'll be like, where is the marketplace showing us that we would need to be at that would be somewhat reflective of fair market value? And now,
and what he said there, I want everybody to be clear. So he's painting a picture to help them to self-discover, because this is about them self-discovering, not you telling them. But he's using very specific language. So he said, where do you think we need to position the property price-wise in order to create value in the eyes of the buyer and make them choose your home versus the competition? That would be reflective of fair market value. We have a very strong concept of fairness in the United States, very strong. So when I use that word fair, it triggers Jose to be like, oh, I need to be fair. Right?
Now at this point, they're either going to say a number that's realistic, or they're going to say a number that's high, or they're going to say, well, Aaron, before we tell you a number, we want to hear your opinion. And this is the trap. This is what I was saying that at the very beginning I would get stuck on. So, Aaron, we want to hear what you have to say first.
Yeah, you do. Thanks, brother. Thanks for giving me the mic, bro. Appreciate that.
Teeing you up.
Yeah. So what you would say to that is we're just going to circle around in a different way. Right. So when I ask it the first time and then they're like, well, what do you think? It's like, well, I appreciate that. And let's look at this information, closely one more time. And we can see that we have active on the market at 550, 560, and 570. And they've been on the market respectively for 40, 50, and 65 days. Now, here's my question to you. What do you think the buying public is telling them about their price and product? And then Now, where most agents get tripped up is you start verbally vomiting about how much you know, and those are overpriced, and that's why they're not selling. That's dumb, because you're going to get into an argument. They're going to say mine's nicer and my neighbor's an asshole, so he should sell for less. Like, there's all these different things that are going to happen, right? So instead, you ask it, like, what do you think the buying public is telling you about their price? And they're like, well, it must be too high. Yeah, and when you see that these, the last ones that sold were at 535, 537, and 540, I mean, honestly, now notice that word honestly. Everything after the word honestly has to be honest. Honestly, if you were a buyer and you were going to buy this home up like all over again, having seen what's active on the market, not selling, seen what's sold and closed most recently, I imagine you might make an offer a little bit above, like 540, the last one that sold. Do you think you would offer $40,000 to $50,000 more when there's 3 other properties to choose from? Shh. And be quiet. And what you're doing there is politely confronting them. Because for most of the people in the United States, the majority of their net worth is tied up into their house. So because of that, it's very difficult for them to think about it like a commodity that's bought and sold. It's very difficult for them to see what's true. You're also activating something called the endowment effect. The endowment effect, it's quantifiable, measurable. They've done studies at like Princeton and Harvard, which is where if I touch like a coffee cup, right, for longer than, I don't know, like a minute or two, I will actually pay more for this cup than I would one that I hadn't touched. Why? Because I feel like it's mine. And because it's mine, it must be better. And we all do this, by the way, right? So what else could possibly have more ownership than the space that we live in? So it's very difficult. Like we think that it's better just because it's ours. And you see this with the sellers who turned into buyers. So the sellers at first are like, well, Jose, don't you see we redid this kitchen 25 years ago? Like, that should be worth $100,000. And then when they become buyers, they're like, what are these buyers thinking, man? Like, these prices are outrageous. What you're witnessing is the endowment effect in action. So the way that we're like kind of phrasing things is to counteract the endowment effect.
Well, even then, like the way that you taught it to me, Aaron, was as soon as I hear, well, what do you think about the property? In order to go on that endowment effect, what I usually do is like, well, you know what? That's a really good question. And here's the way I like to think about it. Right now, we've got our seller's cap on. And as a seller, obviously, we want to make the most amount of money. And I'm with you. I'm on the same page. My job is to help you get as much money. What I have found that typically helps in this process is instead of thinking about this from a seller's perspective, is that if we think about it from a buyer's perspective. So let's say that you're a buyer for this property. And let's say I bring you into this home. And let's say that you tell me, Jose, I want to make an offer. But before I do, can you please show me what is sold and closed most recently? Now, as your agent, I pull up these 3 properties that we went over. I pull up the property that yours is better than at 550. I pull up the one that's at 575, and then I pull up the one that's better at 600,000. Honestly, Aaron, if you were about to make an offer on this property, what do you think you would offer on this property that would be somewhat reflective of fair market value? And then just shut up, because at that point, they're going to be like, well, I probably wouldn't offer more than 575 on the property. That's probably what they're going to say. And at that point, you've got them to say it out loud. So now it's not you telling them what you think the property is worth, or very rarely. And it's funny because when I take them through that process, they almost forgot that they asked me for the value, and then they tell you what the value is. So it's so interesting that when I take them through that process, they forget. Or they may say, well, Jose, well, we want to hear what you have to say. At that point, now I'm going to tell them, but I'm going to tell them in a way, well, if I was a buyer and I was looking at this information, honestly, Aaron, would you honestly pay more than $575 for the property?
Yeah. And the key there is when he says honestly, that's neurolinguistic programming. Like everything after the word honestly has to be honest. And it triggers his mind to think like, oh, I got to be honest here. And it's going to force them. Look, I need everybody to understand is that the kind of processing doesn't happen when you're speaking. It's when they're thinking. You actually think that like you're going to convince them with your words. No, the processing is happening when they are thinking. What me and Jose are structuring it in such a way where we ask questions that force them to think. And we have the courage to be quiet enough, long enough for them to process and self-discover, right? So people don't do what you want. They do what they self-discover. The reason why this is such like a friction for people is because you're going in there trying to be like, well, don't you know who I am? And I sold 5 properties this year. It makes me like, a genius in pricing property and like, this and that. And then it becomes an argument.
Yeah. And even then now, so like, let's say that the number that they say is 575, like, yeah, we would probably pay 575. Or you ask them like, would you pay more than 575 for the property? And they say no. You may ask like, okay, so what do you think you would actually pay? Well, I'd probably offer like 5, or what do you think you'd actually offer? But I'd offer like not pay, ask them offer. They'll be like, well, I would probably offer like 560. Okay. So we see where the value is at now. Now it just comes down to strategy.
Yes. So when they tell you like, well, I'd probably somewhere around like 560. And then what you can say is, yeah, I agree with you. The marketplace is showing us somewhere around 560 seems to be reasonable. Look what just happened, guys. That is some Jedi shit right there. Okay. Instead of you having to be like, blah, blah, blah. And it becomes like this debate. And I enter into exhibit A and exhibit B. And I have my price per square foot and my green charts and my blue charts and my orange charts. Instead, they told me, yeah, somewhere around 560 seems to be reasonable. I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. The market, not me. The market is showing us somewhere between like 560, 550 seems to be reasonable. So now the question is how do we get there? And we really have 2 strategies at our disposal. I'd like to review those 2 strategies that you have because I want you to feel comfortable with the one we ultimately end up choosing. And whatever you decide, I will support you 100%. And then be quiet. And then you go over the 2 strategies. So how about my wonderful friend Jose with the cute cheeks can let us know exactly what those 2 strategies are?
Got it. So I would say,
hey, do you like how he was like, yes, I do have cute cheeks. Thank you.
Well, I was actually going to say I'm working on getting rid of them as much as I can. And I think that every week that we've talked, there's progress. So I started off at like 217, all the way to 222. I'm down to 202 right now.
Well, bro, you're working on that pancito, bro. Let's go.
I'm getting it down, man. I'm getting it down. I'm getting my social media game on, So, so there's really 2 strategies. So now that we see where the price is at, Aaron, there's really 2 strategies that we can utilize in an attempt to get the highest dollar amount. Now, the first strategy is where we see where the range is at. We see that it's somewhere between 560 and 575, but we decide to price it higher than that. Now, the logic behind this strategy is we can always come back down, or that we can leave a little bit of room to negotiate. The second strategy is where instead of doing that, we price it what I call right on the money. Now, the benefit of utilizing this strategy is that sometimes instead of getting one offer, sometimes we can drive more than one offer. We can force people to compete and then drive up the price. So based on what's important to you and your family, which one of these 2 strategies do you think would serve you best?
Yeah, perfectly done.
Or I may even show them, be like, now the problem with this strategy is that sometimes people think that if I start off in that range, that people are going to offer lower than that price. And then I can show them an example of a property where instead of it coming lower, you get multiple offers. And then you ask them like, based on what we see, which one of these two strategies would you feel more comfortable with, basically?
Yeah, and then what you can also, the only thing I would add to that, I mean, it's perfectly done. The only thing I would add to that is at the end, you're like, yeah, not only do we end up with the best, so let's say we get multiple offers on the table. I'm curious, Jose, who usually wins in that negotiation if you have multiple offers, the seller or the buyer? And then quiet. And they're like, well, the seller. And I'm like, well, why is that? And they're like, well, you have people competing. I'm like, exactly. And not only do you end up with the best price, which I know is very important, you also end up with the best terms and conditions. Can I explain to you what I mean? And they're like, well, yeah. Well, let's say we have 3 offers on the table. One's FHA with 3.5% down, another's like 20%, and another one's cash. I mean, which one do you think we're probably going to go with if the terms and conditions are similar? I'm like, well, cash. And why is that? Well, because we don't have to deal with a lender and this and that. I know the buyer's agents listening are going to get mad. Sorry, that's what it is. So, yeah, like, exactly, because we don't have to deal with a lender, appraisals, like the mortgage falling through. So, not only do you end up with the best price, but you end up with the best terms and conditions. And I know you shared with me, it's paramount. It's very important that you be done and complete at like 90 to 100-ish days tops. And what that means is that if we do accept an offer, what we wouldn't want to happen is that after we accept it, it falls through and we have to start over again and it pushes out that time frame. Does that make sense to you? And they're like, well, yeah. And then you're like, okay, so then based on what you're looking to accomplish and why, based on the time frame you'd like to make this happen in light of what you value most, being that, we want to get it right the first offer that we get, which one of these strategies do you think would help you to net the most and get the best terms and conditions? And then be quiet and let them tell you. Now, I want everybody to realize, you there on Instagram, you here on Facebook and on YouTube, this is completely different than the way you guys do it. I know it is. I talk to you guys all the time. And this way of doing it is much more about collaboration, and it's much more about self-discovery. You will get less friction. You will get less pushback. And they're going to appreciate and respect it more. You'll lose less listings instead of being like, I think it's here. And they're like, I think it's here. And then you're like, well, specifically what causes you to believe you can get that amount? That's like me saying, well, Jose, specifically what caused you to believe you should wear that tie today? Like, he's going to get mad and he's going to like push back. Exactly.
What's wrong with my tie? What's wrong with my tie?
Exactly, dude.
There's nothing wrong with it. I'm kidding.
That's exactly what's going to happen, right?
So what I was going to say to you is, okay, so now let's say that they say, I want to start off with a little bit of the higher strategy. That's where I want to start off. I will ask, okay, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
And then they might say, well, I want to start off at 600,000,
Yeah.
And
I want everybody to hear when Jose says, what are you thinking? It's strategic. So what he wants them to do, because we're negotiating now, he wants him to tell him before he launches into some pontification about how smart he is and how he went with an appraiser and held his hand, like none of that. He's like, all right, well, what were you thinking? And he didn't make him wrong either, which is also really important. Yeah, and I think what agents do without realizing it through tonality and body language, they make them wrong. They get like disappointed that they want to start higher. So it's like, okay, well, that's an option. Tell me, what were you? And notice what I just said. Yeah, of course, that's an option. You're the boss. My job is just to help you to make an informed decision. It's never to talk you into doing anything. Guys, that is completely different than what you do.
Not only that,
trying to talk people into doing stuff.
Not only that, but at this point, you've already established what market value is. They basically said, hey, market value is at 575, but I want to price it higher than that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, okay, well, that's fine. I want to be clear that we can totally do that because you're the boss. My job is just to help you to make an informed decision. It's not to talk you into doing anything. And I want you to be clear that that strategy isn't wrong. It's not bad. It does have some downsides. So what I'd like to do is to go over with you some of the downsides of that strategy so you can decide if that really works for you and your family. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. Would that be all right? And they're like, yeah.
What are the downsides?
Well, the first downside is that it usually takes longer. I know you were kind enough to share with me that the main reason you're moving, job relocation, you want to be there in the next 90 to 100 days. That means we have to be under contract in the next 30 to 45. And your neighbors, Jose, they've done us a huge favor. Do you know what it is?
No, what is it?
They've already tested the market at those higher prices and it's not working. We have 3 here at 560, 570, and 580. And on average, they've been on the market 60 days or more. Tell me this. What would happen if we were still here 60 to 90 days from now and your home wasn't sold? How would that affect you and your family? and this move?
It wouldn't be good.
Okay, so that's something to consider with regards to that strategy. The second issue with regards to that strategy is that one of the first questions buyers ask me when they come inside of a property is, how many days has this been on the market? Now, why do you think they ask me that?
They want to see maybe if there's room to negotiate, or like if there's something wrong with it.
I agree. There's a perceived value that's tied to time. And let me ask you this. As time goes by, does the perceived value stay the same, or does it go down? Do people start thinking, wow, it's been on the market longer, there must be something wrong?
No, they probably start asking, like, is there something wrong with it, or why has it been sitting on the market?
Exactly. And then you start to see offers that come in less and less, and that's not what we want, right? So
Correct.
that's the second issue with that strategy. Now, the other strategy that we discussed is where you can position it competitively right out of the gate. And in doing so, we force people to compete. And what ends up coming to the surface is the most that somebody's willing to pay and the best terms, because not only are we after the most price, for you personally, what I really wouldn't want to happen for you and your family is we go under contract with an offer and 45 days in, it falls out because of financing or because of some issue. And then we're still here and the home hasn't sold, because that would really not be good for your family, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So either one of those strategies are okay. Now that you know the pros and cons of each, my question is based on what you're looking to accomplish and why, which one do you think would serve you and your family best?
Now, guess what? The way he's presenting it, it's not like, hey, look, I'm only work with you if you take it at this price, or we're only working together if we agree on the price. It's like, hey, what would you like to do? You know, we're working together regardless. You know, it's just like, which one of the strategies would you like to use? So it's not like an area where it's like we're not working together if we can't agree on price, because that does happen where people don't work together because they can't agree on price. Now, here's one thing that Aaron said that I thought was brilliant, and I actually wrote it down.
Hell yeah, bro. You think I'm brilliant? Let's go.
So the line, like, and this is, let's say you have an active property that's been on the market for 120 days and you have it in your comps. The line, let's say they want to start off with a higher strategy. So look, we can definitely do that, Aaron. At the same time, your neighbor has done us a huge favor. Do you know what that is? No, I don't. Well, your neighbor has actually tested that strategy for us. So look, your neighbor has been on the market at the 600,000 that you want to start off with for 90 days. Now, we have a choice, and the choice is yours. We can either position your property at the same price that your neighbor has already tested for us, and it hasn't worked in 90 days, and in conversations with that agent, they're talking about reducing the price. Or B, we can position it where buyers and sellers have already agreed that properties like yours are selling for, and really increase the chances of the property selling. Based on what's important to you, which one of these two strategies you think would serve you best?
That's it. And you're putting it in their court, and now they're going to make a decision based on what they feel makes sense. And again, this is so counterintuitive to the way the most agents present this. They present it like, I know and you don't. I'm the authority, you're not. They present it in a very paternalistic way, like, oh, like I know and you have no idea what's going on. When the truth is if the majority of Americans have the majority of their net worth tied up into their house, how often do you think they're looking at online platforms of what their house is worth?
All the time.
They're refreshing it daily, bro. They look at this stuff more than you do. They probably know more about their house than you do, dude. And you're going in there like, well, I know more than you. No, it needs to be collaborative is what it needs to be. Right?
100%.
And my hope for everybody who's on the stream and who will watch it later is that they begin to pivot away from that strategy of presenting with authority and instead present from a place of collaboration and self-discovery, because your clients will appreciate it more. You will list more properties. You'll position them better right out of the gate. You'll move inventory faster. Clients are happy. You're happy. Buyers agents are happy because you're giving them good inventory to sell. Like, everything gets better when you get world-class at this.
You know what I think the next topic, and if anybody's on the live and you want to comment below, what do you think about doing? I remember when you had the conversation with me about price reductions, and you broke it down that the price reduction actually starts at the listing presentation after you get a contract signed. Whenever you had that conversation with me, I was like mind blown.
I remember I said, I think that's we should definitely do that next time. And I remember I had a conversation with you where I said to you, I'm like, Jose, you're like, yeah. I'm like, bro, you have an awesome brain. And you were like, yeah. I'm like,
Use
yeah,
it.
you should use it. And you were like, oh.
So like, let's say that for whatever reason they want to start with the higher one of the strategies, and let's say you decide that you're okay with taking that listing, then at that point you're going to start setting up a price reduction at the listing presentation. I do it after I get the contract signed. Some people may decide to do it before they get the contract signed, but then it starts off with the talk, and then it transitions into the price reduction script, and you will see that before you actually get the price reduction, you've already had this conversation 3 or 4, 5 times before you do that. I think that's one that you do not want to miss, the price reduction portion, because that is something that you need to practice. That is a presentation in itself, and it's a skill that if you learn, it will make you hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, 100%. I'm in full agreement. And we'll cover it, dude. We're just going to keep coming to you with tactics because most people teach mindset because they can't teach tactics, team. I'm sure all you guys are absolutely like disgusted with the vast majority of content not actually being tangibly beneficial to you. It's like esoteric minds, like mindset's important, but bro, you need to have the tangible skills to be able to actually do this. This is no different than learning how to play a violin, learning how to use a scalpel if you're a surgeon, learning how to use a hammer if you're a carpenter. And because it's a skill, it implies practice. And because of that, it implies that you can learn it. I think some people look at me and Jose, yes, every Friday at, 1:30 Eastern, which whatever that is for you, Tessa. So it's a skill that like, I think people look at me and Jose and like, they're like, oh man, like you're special in some way. Look at me. We are not special in that way. I can tell you for a fact, if you look at Jose's personality profile, it's not that of a world-class salesperson. He, through blood, sweat, and tears, molded himself into a world-class salesperson. I made $13,000 my first calendar year of selling real estate. Like through nauseating, disgusting amounts of practice and role play, turn myself into somebody who can sit in a room with thousands of people and role play live. And the question is when you go from, 6 million transactions to like 4 million or 3.9 million, and the amount of agents we have is 1.5, and there's 2 million less transactions, to imagine that you cannot be world-class at your skills and still get your unfair share and still be a real estate agent in the next 12 months is irresponsible at worst, and it's hallucinatory at best, right? Like, so keep dialing in. That's what we're here to do. And if you liked this episode, be sure to watch the next one. Tune in to the next one. Let's go. Let's grow. Elite Builders, coast to coast, baby.